Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a big question, one that really gets to the heart of early American history. How much did tobacco farming, shape Jamestown and the Virginia colony? If you're working on an essay or just trying to figure out how it all fits together, well, understanding this cash crop is pretty much essential.
It really is the key, isn't it? To properly assess its influence, you have to remember how things started, Jamestown. It wasn't about religious freedom like up north. It was purely a business venture.
Right, the Virginia Company. They were looking for gold, quick riches.
Exactly. Gold, silk, timber, maybe. Anything to make a fast profit for the investors back in London. But that's not what they found. What they found was failure, starvation.
And it got incredibly grim. Before tobacco came along, that early period, it was famously awful, wasn't it? Can you give us a sense of just how bad it was? I remember reading about the starving time, and the accounts are just chilling.
Oh, chilling is the right word. We have George Percy's writings from the winter of 1609-1610. He described men just groaning constantly everywhere in the fort, and bodies being dragged out like dogs, he said, just to be buried. And this wasn't even disease, not primarily. It was, his words, mere famine.
Just sheer starvation. That paints a desperate picture.
Utter desperation. And look at the numbers, they're stark. Out of the first 144 settlers, only 38 survived that initial winter.
38. Wow.
And even zooming out, between 1687 and 1624, something like 7,500 people came over. But fewer than 1,200 were still alive by the end of that period. Less than a fifth.
So the whole enterprise was genuinely on the verge of collapse.
Absolutely. They were close to just packing up, abandoning the whole thing. The colony desperately needed some kind of miracle and economic lifeline.
Okay, so they're failing spectacularly. What actually turns it around? What shifts them from this doomed search for gold to something, well, functional, even if it was harsh?
Tobacco. Specifically, John Rolfe figuring out how to cultivate a strain of tobacco that was actually palatable to European tastes, adapting it from native practices. By 1614, they had something they could export and sell.
And it sold well.
It sold very well. It generated a sizable profit, finally giving the investor something back. This wasn't just another potential commodity, it became the colony's entire reason for being. It cemented Virginia's decidedly commercial orientation.
Okay, and this is where the influence really deepens, right?
Yeah.
Because saving the colony with tobacco meant committing it to a huge amount of physical labor. What did growing this stuff actually involve?
It involved relentless backbreaking work. And this is fundamental to understanding everything that follows. Tobacco exhausts the soil incredibly quickly, so you constantly need new land.
Driving expansion right away.
Immediately. Then there's clearing that land, planting, tending the crop, harvesting, and then this really complex curing process, drying the leaves just right in special barns.
Right.
And finally, packing it all tightly into these enormous wooden barrels, hogsheads they called them, for shipping across the Atlantic. It created this massive, insatiable demand for labor.
And the first big answer to that labor shortage was indentured servitude, basically a system to import workers on contract.
That's exactly it. Think of it as a human supply chain. Mostly young men, mostly poor, often illiterate, signing away, 5 to 7 years of their life.
In exchange for what?
In exchange for passage to Virginia, basic food and clothing during their term, and then freedom dues at the end. Crucially, those dues sometimes included a small plot of land. That promise, owning land eventually, was a huge pull for people with nothing in England.
But given the conditions and the sheer mortality rate you mentioned earlier, was this actually a realistic path to a better life for most of them? The human cost must have been enormous.
It was horrific. A viable pathway? Not really, not for most. The sources we have suggest that for those arriving between 1607 and 1622, maybe 10,000 servants came over.
Okay.
Fewer than 2,000 actually survived long enough to see freedom, less than 1 in 5.
So an 80% mortality or failure rate for the servants.
Something like that, yes. They were treated essentially as property, could be bought and sold, punished brutally, couldn't marry. If a female servant got pregnant, her term was often extended, or she might even be sold. It was a system built for maximum extraction from a workforce they expected to die.
That's incredibly bleak. If they were burning through workers that quickly, they must have needed a constant, powerful incentive to keep people signing up back in England. Was that the headright system? The institutionalized promise of land?
Precisely. The headright system was, from the company's perspective, quite clever. It linked the need for land directly to the need for labor.
How did it work exactly?
Simple concept. You got 50 acres of land if you paid your own way over. And critically, you got another 50 acres for every single person whose passage you paid for. That could be a family members or, more often, indentured servants.
So planters had a direct incentive to import more and more servants. They got more labor and more land.
Exactly. It fueled immigration, fueled expansion. But it also baked in a massive problem right from the start.
Which was a conflict.
Unavoidable conflict, yes. Because that tobacco economy needed fresh soil constantly, and the headright system meant colonists were always demanding more land, those 50 acres.
And that land wasn't empty.
Not at all. It was forest, hunting grounds, villages, the ancestral lands of the Powhatan Confederacy. The colony's entire economic model depended on pushing outwards, taking land that was already occupied.
So the need for tobacco land directly created the conflict with Native Americans. I know Powhatan, the leader, initially seemed willing to maybe coexist or trade.
There are indications, yes. John Smith wrote about Powhatan hoping for some kind of alliance, maybe trading copper for English tools like hatchets, trying to manage these newcomers. But the English model wasn't about balance.
It was about expansion.
Continuous expansion for tobacco. That hunger for land just grew and grew. And by 1623, after years of tension and smaller skirmishes, it erupted into what sources call all-out war. Native forces actually killed about a third of the English population in a major attack.
A third. That's staggering. It shows how deeply tied the violence was to the crop itself.
Absolutely. The conflict wasn't some side effect. It was a direct result of the colony's core economic engine. Grow more tobacco, which means take more land.
What's really striking here, especially if you're assessing tobacco's influence, is how different this made Virginia from, say, the New England colonies founded later. Virginia's entire reason for existing was commercial profit.
That's a crucial distinction. No overarching religious mission like the Puritans in Massachusetts Bay. Virginia was about pounds, shillings, and pence derived from tobacco leaf.
And that shaped the society differently.
Profoundly differently. The Puritans built these relatively compact towns centered around the church and community governance. Virginia, because tobacco needed large tracts of land and depleted soil quickly, developed these sprawling plantations. Society became very spread out, very stratified, based on land ownership and wealth generated by agriculture. People lived much farther apart. The geography of the crop dictated the social geography.
Okay, so this commercial focus, the land demands, the conflict, it also must have shaped the long-term labor situation. You said indentured servitude had horrific mortality rates. Was that system even sustainable for the planters? Did its failures push them towards slavery?
The sources strongly suggest it wasn't sustainable in the long run, especially for the planters wanting stability. They needed a labor force that was permanent, controllable, and less likely to eventually compete with them for land.
Right, because freed servants wanted their own piece of the pie.
Exactly. Now, the shift to chattel slavery, defining Africans legally as property with that status inherited, was actually a bit slower to fully codify in Virginia compared to, say, the brutal sugar islands like Barbados. Barbados was kind of the model for hyper-exploitation.
But the trend was there. The first Africans arrived in 1619, right? How did their status evolve?
Yes, 1619 is the traditional date. Initially, their status was somewhat ambiguous. Some early Africans seem to have worked alongside white indentured servants, and some even gained freedom. But over the course of the 17th century, the legal framework hardened, stripping away rights and cementing race-based, lifelong, inheritable slavery.
What pushed that transition to accelerate towards the end of the century?
A key event was Bacon's Rebellion in the 1670s. This was a major uprising. It involved both discontented white former servants who couldn't get good land and enslaved and free black people. They were united temporarily against the ruling planter elite and policies towards Native Americans.
It must have terrified the wealthy landowners.
It absolutely did. Seeing poor whites and blacks joining forces, that was a nightmare scenario for the planter class. It really underscored the perceived danger of a large, landless, potentially rebellious population of former servants.
So the solution was to double down on a labor force that could never become free, never demand land, and could be divided from poor whites by race.
That was essentially the calculus, yes. Chattel slavery offered a way to secure a permanent, controllable, and non-threatening labor force to power the tobacco economy. It helped ensure the stability of the planter elite.
Let's touch on the political side briefly. We hear about the House of Burgesses starting in 1619, often called the first representative assembly in America. Male landowners could vote. But how much real power did they have, considering Virginia was basically a tobacco factory for England?
Well, it was significant as a start towards self-government, certainly. It gave colonists, at least the property-owning men, some locals say. But yeah, its independence was heavily limited
By the economic.
by the economics and the imperial structure. Virginia existed within mercantilism. Its prime function was to enrich the mother country. The crown appointed a royal governor who had veto power over anything the Burgesses passed. So while it was a step towards democracy, the colony's political life was always ultimately subject to its commercial obligations to England and the demands of tobacco.
Okay, so let's try to synthesize this for our listener who's trying to assess the influence. Tobacco wasn't just important. It sounds like it was the absolute foundation. It saved the colony, but it also seems to have set it on a very specific and maybe troubled path.
That's a good way to put it. Assessing the influence means seeing it as truly system-shaping. It provided the economic salvation Jamestown desperately needed. But the way it did so, demanding constant land acquisition and a ruthless system for acquiring and controlling labor, locked Virginia into a pattern.
A pattern of exploitation and conflict.
Yes. Exploitation shifting from indentured servitude to chattel slavery and perpetual conflict over land with native peoples. It created this hierarchical, profit-obsessed society that was fundamentally different from colonies founded on other principles. More focused on individual wealth accumulation through agriculture, perhaps more unstable too.
So the very thing that allowed Virginia to survive also embedded some of its deepest, longest-lasting problems, the paradox of the cash crop.
Absolutely. The entire system was predicated on expansion and replacement, placing depleted soil with new land, replacing dying or freed servants with new servants, and eventually replacing temporary labor with permanent enslavement. This constant churn, especially on the frontiers and within the labor force, made Virginia society inherently prone to conflict, both internal, like Bacon's Rebellion, and external, the endless wars against Native Americans. Tobacco ensured survival, yes, but it also sowed the seeds of centuries of social struggle specific to that region.
That's a really powerful assessment. Okay, here's something for you, our listener, to think about after this deep dive. Imagine Jamestown had found significant gold early on. If they hadn't needed a land-hungry, labor-intensive crop like tobacco, do you think chattel slavery would still become so central to the Chesapeake economy and society? Or was tobacco the indispensable catalyst for that specific, tragic trajectory?